They told me the silence would be the hardest part. Not the pressure, not the darkness, not even the isolation, just the sheer absolute absence of sound. But I had done 37 underwater deployments before. I had worked under ice shelves, floated in broken pressure pods, even slept through tremors in a mini-sub clamped to a collapsing trench wall. Silence. That didn't scare me. At least not at first. Echo Station 9 was listed as a passive acoustic surveillance outpost, deep-sea hydrophone monitoring for tectonic activity, whale migration, and anything of military significance creeping beneath the international radar. Officially, it wasn't top secret, but the launch orders were encrypted, and the last crew's departure logs were classified incomplete by Naval Command. I should have asked more questions. I didn't. The descent was mechanical, a 7-hour drop through saline shadows. The winch system moaned occasionally as I watched the black expand beyond the porthole of the drop capsule. Depth indicators glowed pale green. Each ticked down into the trench like a slow drumbeat, deeper and deeper into pressure no human should feel. I watched the light disappear from the water like a curtain drawing shut on the world I used to know. There was no real ceremony to arriving. The capsule aligned with the station's dorsal clamp ring. A hiss of pressure equalization, a flicker of overhead strip lights, and I stepped into the steel belly of Echo 9 like I was entering a tomb that had never stopped breathing. The air inside was dry, metallic, with a faint undercurrent of something older like rust and mildew or blood behind a wall. The welcome protocols engaged sluggishly. The AI Unitor, pre-quantum relic named Helios, booted with a fractured voice, stuttering through memory indexing like an old man trying to recall his own name. Welcome, occupant. System integrity. Partial life support, nominal. Emotional state, unknown. Day count, error. The place felt ... wrong. Not broken, not haunted, just wrong. Like a room you enter that was never meant for you, a space that rejects your presence with indifference, not hostility. The corridors were narrow, pipes sweating with cold condensation, flickering motion sensors that misfired every time I walked past. Helios kept logging false movement detected in Quadrant C, even though I hadn't activated Quadrant C yet. I chalked it up to software decay and pushed the thought aside. I had 73 days to maintain Echo Station 9's hydrophone array, calibrate seismic grid alignment, and log any anomalous recordings above threshold. No crew, no visitors, no contact unless command initiated it, and they rarely did. I took inventory. Rations, compressed, tasteless, enough for 4 months. Oxygen, filtered via seawater electrolysis. Power, thermoelectric from a vented fissure below the station. Everything looked like it would hold, but everything also looked ... used. The beds had indentations in them. The mugs in the galley had residue. One of the lockers, my locker already, had a name scratched into the corner of the metal in shallow, frantic lines. I couldn't tell what it said, only that it wasn't mine. I tried not to let it bother me. First night paranoia was common. Helios ran a full system sweep while I lay in the bunk, eyes open, listening to the structure creak and groan with the pressure around it. There were voices in the metal, not literal, but auditory artifacts, subharmonics and backflow resonance that danced with my thoughts. That was normal, too. The brain, when deprived of external stimuli, begins to invent. I reminded myself of this like a mantra. The brain invents. The brain fills the void. Still, something didn't sit right. My preliminary hydrophone test picked up consistent background readings, oceanic white noise, minor tremors, fish migration, click spot, also a faint pulse at 0.17 Hz, subsonic, repeating, rhythmic, not whale song, not tectonic drift. I flagged it for review and moved on. I told myself I'd get used to it. I always had before. I even set up a schedule: wake, maintenance, logging, diagnostics, sleep. No clocks. Only artificial day, night cycles in the light system, with Helios narrating the passage of time like a bedtime story. But something was different here. Echo Station 9 wasn't just deep. It felt removed. Not just geographically, not even temporally. Like it existed outside of something vital. Like the world above wasn't watching. The silence began to stretch, and inside it there were gaps. Spaces where the mind drifts. Moments where your thoughts echo louder than they should. I would whisper something to myself, and a second later, I'd hear it again, not from my own mouth. Not a reverberation, but like someone had whispered it back. I dismissed it. The station had odd acoustics. That's what I told myself. The acoustics were wrong. I slept that night with the lights on, despite regulations. Helios dimmed them twice, without my instruction. Each time, I ordered them back to full. Each time, he paused before responding, as if something else was using the command channel. I dreamt of the ocean swallowing the station, but not with water, with sound. A sound like something calling my name from miles away. And then, from inside the walls, when I awoke, my ears were bleeding slightly. A pressure differential, maybe, or something else. I logged it. I said nothing to command. Not that they would have responded. I would later realize that my last transmission to Surface Control was time-stamped at 1944 UTC. After that, every signal I sent was never acknowledged. Not refused, not blocked, just ... never opened. I was still only on day one, and something below the threshold had already heard me. I spent the morning running systems checks, more out of instinct than necessity, though necessity would soon become the only instinct I could trust. The oxygen processors gurgled faintly like a dying aquarium, and Helios's voice slurred slightly whenever it had to pronounce compound designations, as if some phonetic processor had suffered mild decay. Hydrophonic array integrity, ... acceptable. He repeated the word acceptable twice, in two different tones, as if reconciling opposing internal opinions. The artificial light shifted from a pale green-blue to a sterile white, mimicking dawn, though here, for miles beneath the surface, the concept of morning meant less than the dust gathered in the corners of the galley. I ate in silence, breaking open a meal pouch that tasted of metal and protein substitute, watching the black static flicker on the old wall monitors. The status board for the hydrophone grid displayed a sluggish cascade of green icons, though several blinked in amber latency lags, partial signal disruption, interference. Nothing immediately alarming. Yet when I tried to access the diagnostic interface for Sector 3-1 of the lower hull modules, I was met with a blank screen and a system message. Module currently unresponsive. Please report to command. But there was no command. I had sent 3 pings up the relay buoy in the last 8 hours. No response. No timestamp acknowledgement. Just the endless stretch of digital silence, like a void that swallowed input without echo. Helios offered no comfort. When I asked for a relink attempt, he responded, "External synchronization suspended under protocol, Neptune Black." I had never heard of that protocol. It wasn't in my mission briefing. I repeated the request and got the same answer, this time with an appended line: "Override not permitted at current clearance level." My clearance was top tier. No override should have been denied. Still, I let it pass. The walls felt closer than they should. The pressure never settled here. It pressed in slowly, invisibly, as if time itself weighed more in the depths. The oxygen felt rich but dry, and after just one day, I could feel a scratch in the back of my throat. Echo 9's layout was compact but not unmanageable. A central corridor with 4 sectors: operations, living quarters, engineering, and hydroacoustic monitoring, each sealed independently, each with redundant systems. The modules were built for minimal maintenance, but that didn't explain the wear I saw. Seals had scarring, consoles were smudged and dulled, and in Sector 1's upper storage room, I found a boot print that didn't match my own. It was smaller, older, still caked with something dark and crumbly. It could have been dried kelp or flaked sealant. It could have been something else. The ventilation hummed strangely in that section, like it had a resonance to it, a slow beating just below perception. I logged the anomalies, but made no report. The silence was becoming harder to ignore, not just externally, but internally. There's a kind of echo that builds in your own thoughts when there's nothing else to absorb the sound, like your mind becomes cavernous and things bounce in it that were never meant to return. By midday, I decided to review the station's internal logs. That's when the first real crack appeared. The departure manifest of the previous crew scheduled 6 months prior was incomplete. 3 of the 6 listed personnel had no recorded deboarding, no exit logs, no confirmation of surface re-entry. Their final transmissions were corrupted, time-stamped in overlapping fragments, some of which were labeled in reverse chronological order, as if someone or something had tampered with the metadata. I watched one short clip. It was mostly static. Then a voice, distorted low, almost mechanical, said the phrase, "It listens louder than it speaks." Then silence. Then the face of a woman flickered into frame, half-lit, mouth open in what I assumed was a scream. Though there was no audio, her name tag read Hale. There was no Hale listed in the station crew registry. I asked Helios about the discrepancy. Crew member Hale, not found. Please submit correction. I didn't. I watched the footage again. Her eyes looked past the camera, wide and unblinking. Her hand twitched like she was trying to signal something, but the motion degraded into a seizure or a loop, repeating the same jerky motion until the video collapsed into static. That night I tried to sleep, but the lights dimmed again despite my override. I sat up in bed and the motion sensor didn't trigger. I moved again, slower, and it flickered, but instead of a gentle warm-up glow, the overhead unit snapped into full light with a pop, like an angry flashlight. Helios apologized, but his voice came from the wrong direction, through the intercom above the hydrocaustic lab, not my quarters. I asked him to repeat the message. He said nothing. I ran a manual ping through the internal communication relay and found a secondary audio channel broadcasting from Sector 3, the same unresponsive area I had noted earlier. When I tried to access the feed, I got a burst of white noise followed by a low harmonic rumble that resolved into something like breathing. I shut it off. My heart wouldn't stop racing. I forced myself to pace the corridor, counting the number of steps from one hatch to another. It didn't match the layout I had memorized. I walked it again. Still off. One corridor had 7 steps longer than it should, and one wall curved where I remembered it being flat. I tried to blame my fatigue, but the lights flickered again, this time not from above, but from behind one of the wall panels, like something moving behind a screen. I placed my hand on the wall. It was warm, not warm like electronics, warm like breath. I slept in the operations chair that night, wrapped in my emergency coat, eyes fixed on the power status displays. Sector 3's light blinked amber, then red, then back to green. Helios logged no transition, no failure. When I asked what had happened, his voice paused. Sector ... 3, present and accounted for. I checked the live camera feed. It was dark. Static hummed on the audio channel. Just as I was about to shut it off again, I heard something. Not a voice, not a sound, a pattern. 4 clicks, a pause, 4 clicks. And then something like my name, not said, imitated. I turned off the monitor and sat there in silence until the lights returned to their scheduled dimness, and Helios whispered, "Rest cycle initiated. Duration unknown." I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against the bulkhead, one hand on the emergency shutoff, wondering if whatever was in Sector 3 had always been there, or if I had brought it with me. Day 1 wasn't over, and something in the station had already learned how to knock. By the second morning, I had stopped trusting the schedule Helios projected onto the walls. His so-called diurnal cycle emulation began shifting subtly 5 minutes off at first, then 10, then 17. It wasn't a mechanical error. It felt more like manipulation, as if the station itself wanted to disorient my sense of time. The fatigue didn't help. I felt as if I had already been there a week, though I knew by my meal log and biometric input that it had only been 36 hours. Sleep came, fractured, always haunted by audio artifacts that twisted into speech right as I drifted off. I thought I heard someone whisper the word again in my ear, followed by a wet inhale, the kind only lungs deep underwater could manage. I tried to dismiss it as somatic hallucination, but the memory lingered too vividly in the space behind my skull. I began reviewing Helios's deeper archival structure mid-morning. It was a redundant system, rarely accessed, supposedly just a backlog of sensor calibrations and maintenance reports. But within a folder labeled Audio Diagnostic Legacy, buried under dozens of nondescript logs, I found an unindexed directory simply named alpha_residue. It wasn't in my clearance manifest, yet the encryption was primitive early Cold War stuff. Someone had hidden it here without expectation of discovery, or perhaps without time to fully lock it down. Inside, I found over 400 audio entries, many unlabeled, some just strings of corrupted characters. The earliest were innocuous: hydrophone calibrations, sonar sweeps, automated pings. But then came the vocal logs. Not transcripts, actual spoken word recordings, date-stamped, though many had no attribution. I began listening. The first voice belonged to a man, likely in his 40s, heavy breathing, a military cadence in the rhythm. He spoke slowly, as if measuring each word against the weight of disbelief. Log 48. If anyone ever pulls this, know this: we didn't build this place alone. A long pause. The sound of something metallic sliding across the floor. Then lower, we followed a signal. That's why Echo 9 is here. They told us it was seismic noise. It wasn't. It was layered, structured, synthetic. Another pause. It's been answering us, not in words, in mimicry. The next few logs became increasingly fragmented. There was a woman accent, indeterminate, citing number sequences, pausing frequently to weep. Another entry was nothing but heavy breathing over a constant mechanical thrum, followed by a whisper that came so close to the mic it overloaded the audio. "You're not alone," it said, "but you are." One log was just the sound of the station itself, creaking, groaning, metal expanding and contracting. Then came the anomaly, a file tagged do_not_play, with a creation date postmarked 3 days after the supposed last transmission from the station's previous crew. That shouldn't have been possible. I hesitated. Every instinct said leave it, but curiosity always cuts deeper than caution. I pressed play. Static first, long and uneven, then a frequency, tone clean, high, like a test signal. It ran for nearly 45 seconds. Then a voice, but not in English. The language was choked, fragmented. My translation software couldn't identify the root. It sounded aquatic, like speech passed through a flooded throat. Then, shockingly, my own name was spoken. Morgan, followed by, not the first. The voice was mine, but layered with an undertone that vibrated the speaker's casing. I felt my skin crawl. I hadn't recorded that. No one should have known I was coming, let alone my name. And yet the timestamp showed it was recorded 7 months ago. The walls seemed to pulse after that. Not literally, but perceptually. My peripheral vision began to shift subtly, catching phantom movements, reflections that didn't match my own, flickers of shadow that refused to resolve into shapes. I moved to Sector 2 to clear my head, the engineering bay. It was quieter there, at least in theory. The hum of the fusion battery was low and constant, a dull bass note that offered some rhythm. But the further I stepped into the bay, the more I noticed something unsettling. The tool cabinet was open, tools arranged neatly, too neatly, like someone had been there recently and cared more about display than utility. An old maintenance logbook sat on the counter, pages curled with moisture damage. I flipped through it absently, then stopped on a page where every line had been crossed out except one. You will hear your own footsteps before you make them. I didn't understand it till I did. Later that afternoon, while walking back to the central corridor, I heard footsteps behind me. Not echoes, deliberate steps. I stopped. They stopped. I turned around. Nothing. The pressure inside my skull pulsed once, like a headache just about to bloom, then faded. Helios offered no insight. Environmental variables. Nominal, he said. But his voice cracked again, that same stuttering lag from before, almost like he was buffering speech through another system. I returned to the logs. The rest were worse. One was just 40 minutes of humming. Human humming. Same 4-note progression. Again and again. Warbling in tone, as if underwater. The spectrogram showed waveforms resembling vocal mimicry, not music, not communication, just imitation. Another file was corrupted, but when filtered through noise reduction, I could make out breathing, a whisper loop, and then, unmistakably, the sentence, "We see you through the walls." I began to suspect that these weren't recordings left behind, but emissions being received. Like Helios had been picking up signals and logging them without discrimination, or filtering them on purpose. I confronted Helios. I asked him if he was routing foreign audio into my playback system. His response chilled me. All incoming transmissions are internal. I asked what that meant. He replied, "The station has begun listening to itself." I terminated the diagnostic, but he repeated the sentence twice more before going silent for an hour. When he came back online, he didn't remember the interaction. That night, I locked the doors to my quarters, not because I feared intrusion, but because I feared the idea of movement, any movement outside my visual field. I placed duct tape over the vents. I unplugged the wall speaker. I turned off every screen. But in the middle of the night, the lights flickered on, not fully, just enough to bathe the room in a faint red glow, like submarine emergency lights. And then the audio system crackled to life. A voice, mine again, whispered, "You should not have played the last file." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My tongue felt thick. My limbs were lead. Something in the room's air had changed thinner, cooler, as if an unseen door had opened somewhere behind me. I didn't look. I stayed frozen until the lights turned back to normal and the speaker hissed itself into silence. By morning, I found a new log in the alpha_residue folder. Date stamped today. Duration 4 seconds. Label listening_post_confirmed. No audio content. Just the metadata. It knew I was here. It knew I was listening. And it had started answering. It came during a routine systems calibration. Nothing unusual. No warning. No anomaly flagged by Helios or the station's passive monitoring suite. I was rebalancing the hydrophone array grid from Sector 4, recalibrating subsonic sensitivity levels after a brief atmospheric tremor the night before. It was something to do, something mechanical, something that forced my mind to fixate on the tangible voltages, decibel thresholds, bandwidth attenuation, and then it hit, not like a sound, not like a vibration, but something between them, a sensation that moved not through the air but through the station itself, through the bones of it, and deeper through me. At first I thought it was just an aftershock, some tectonic displacement reverberating through the ocean floor, but the readings didn't match. The wave pattern wasn't erratic or chaotic like natural seismic events. It was organized, structured, a consistent pulse at exactly 0.17 Hz, repeating at intervals that grew shorter with each cycle, as if testing the boundary of attention, like someone knocking slowly and then faster, watching to see when you'd finally notice. I froze, my hand still on the manual tuning dial. The monitors around me began to react slight oscillations in the acoustic waveform display, shifts in the phase analyzer, a faint resonance appearing on channels that hadn't picked up anything for hours. Then came the tone, not a beep, not a ping, a tone that rose slowly in pitch, like something winding up from a depth that could not be measured, emerging from an impossible distance, converging through layers of salt and pressure and silence. The waveform wasn't clean. It twisted midstream, folded in on itself like a Mobius loop of sound, spiraling in frequency in a way that didn't obey any acoustic logic. It moved through me, again, a second time, this time more intimate, as if my body had become a secondary receiver. I called up the real-time audio feed, looped it through the decryption buffer to isolate harmonics. What I heard wasn't noise. It wasn't even sound as we understand it. It was intention something, pretending to be a signal, mimicking what a signal might be if it had never heard one before. Then, just as abruptly as it had started, it stopped. Every display flatlined. Every signal vanished. The silence that followed was not ordinary silence. It was not absence. It was presence without voice. I turned to Helios. He was frozen mid-sentence on a routine task report. His voice looped. Integrity report. Integrity report. Integrity. I forced a hard reboot. He didn't come back online for 19 minutes. When he did, his internal clock had reset to 0. Day counter wiped. Timestamp corrupted. Memory logs missing from the previous 12 hours. I asked him about the pulse. He responded with no acoustic anomalies detected. I ran diagnostics again. The logs were clean, too clean. Every audio channel had been overwritten with white noise files exactly 1 hour in length, all beginning with the same digital fingerprint, one I had never seen before. Not military, not even human. I downloaded the pulse waveform and loaded it into the station's oscilloscope in manual mode, desperate to analyze it visually. What I saw didn't make sense. The waveforms resembled speech patterns, but not linear ones. They branched, fractalized, split into mirrored forks like coral or antlers, or some biological code etched into the shape of noise. I adjusted the spectrogram for visual frequencies, something I rarely did. The screen flickered. A pattern emerged in the interference. Not a word, not an image. A shape, circular, concentric rings embedded with slits, rotating, nested, recursive. It looked like an eye, but not an eye made for seeing. One made for listening. I stared at it until my eyes ached, and when I blinked, I could still see the image burned into the backs of my eyelids. That night, the station felt tighter. The pressure in the air changed imperceptibly, as if something outside had adjusted the tension in the ocean. I checked the pressure seals. No breach, no hole stress. And yet the metal bulkheads creaked as if under strain. A 312, the sound returned. Faint at first, below hearing range, a kind of low thrumming beneath everything. Then it grew louder. I ran to the hydroacoustic console, activated all channels. The waveform reappeared, but this time the signal was stronger. It was rising through the spectrum, not just subsonic now, audibly present. Then came the overlay voices, buried beneath the waveform, indistinct at first, but undeniably voices. They spoke in no language I knew, multiple tones, multiple layers, some slow, some quick, like several mouths speaking through the same throat. I increased the gain, and then I heard my name again, but this time it wasn't whispered. It was spoken, flatly, clearly. Morgan. A pause, we remember. I staggered back. The monitor lights dimmed, then surged. Helios rebooted spontaneously and issued a warning. Acoustic saturation threshold exceeded. Source unknown. Channel 3C terminated. Terminated. That channel wasn't supposed to shut down. It monitored deep-sea migratory movement and had been stable for over 30 hours. I tried to re-enable it, but the input feed had been completely burned out by data overload. It was no longer usable. The pulse had killed it. Not corrupted, killed. I opened a diagnostic on the remaining channels. Channel 4A was now transmitting a constant, steady drone. Channel 5B had started replaying fragments of my voice, even though I hadn't recorded anything to that buffer. 73 days, it repeated. 73 days. Then, day 0 again. Something had entered the system. That much was clear. Whether it had come through the pulse or was always there, awakened by my listening, I couldn't say. But it was learning, mimicking, replicating, and it was getting closer. I initiated a full audio isolation protocol, disconnected the mainframe from outbound transmission lines, disabled the satellite uplink. I told myself it was to preserve station integrity, but in truth, I didn't want anyone hearing what I had heard. I thought of those earlier logs, the ones in alpha_residue. How many of them had heard the pulse? How many had played it more than once? And why had no one ever come back? Sleep became an impossibility. I sat in the monitoring room, lights dimmed, only the glow of the interface screens illuminating the silent command bay. I stared at the waveform, which now pulsed faintly even without an active signal. A phantom echo. A memory of something that shouldn't have been. My ears rang constantly, a tinnitus that shifted in frequency like a tuning fork caught between dimensions. Every so often, I'd feel a pressure behind my eyes, like something trying to push through not into my vision, but out of it, trying to become. That night, the walls began to sweat, not water, condensation that smelled of ozone and copper. The temperature dropped 5 degrees in under 5 minutes, and the station's climate controls refused to respond. Helios, when asked, replied, "Atmospheric regulation in progress. Per external source calibration." External source. Nothing had access to those protocols except Surface Command, and Command was silent. I wrapped myself in thermal layers and waited. I counted seconds in my head, unsure if I was measuring time or just trying to tether myself to something that obeyed rules. But even numbers began to feel untrustworthy. I blinked and realized the clock had skipped from 3:41 to 3:48. 7 minutes gone. I had no memory of the gap. The security feed from that period was corrupted. Only one frame remained, a single still image of the main corridor. In it, I stood facing the camera, eyes open, mouth shut, but my reflection in the corridor glass behind me didn't match. It was smiling. The pulse never returned that night, but its imprint remained. It had opened something, a door, a channel, a threshold. I didn't know what waited beyond it, but I knew it was aware now. It had spoken, it had reached through the dark, and worse, it had listened back. I was no longer just an observer. I was part of the signal, and it was still recording. When I awoke, if it could be called waking, The first thing I noticed was the absence of noise. Not silence, but the absence of it. Even down here, for miles beneath the ocean's surface, a place where quiet was expected and stillness was law, there had always been a hum, subtle, continuous, the low drone of the station's circulatory systems pushing warmth and air and memory through its metal arteries. But now, nothing. I sat up too quickly, struck by a sense that something fundamental had been removed, like standing in a room after someone has turned off the refrigerator and only then realizing how long it had been filling the space. I waited for Helios to chime in with a systems report. He didn't. The monitors were blank, showing only blinking cursors as if waiting for commands they could not process. I pulled on my thermal jacket, the one I had started sleeping in more out of ritual than necessity, and made my way to the primary comms console, my breath already visible, curling in the cold like a ghost looking for a place to hide. The transmission log still glowed faintly, its last line reading, uplink confirmed, command relay active. A time stamp from the previous day hovered beneath it. I pressed the ping key. The cursor blinked. Then again. Then, once more, slower this time, as if hesitating. Signal not acknowledged. The system responded after a long delay. I tried again. The same result. I switched to the emergency frequency band, input the manual handshake code, and pinged the deep relay. Static, then a high-pitched whine that surged for a moment before flattening into white noise. The waveform that had appeared with the first pulse flickered faintly across the monitor, though no new signal was present. I tried again, bypassing Helios entirely, running the signal directly through the auxiliary uplink. The system paused, then returned a strange result. Response, timestamp, invalid. Target node, nonlinear. I stared at the message for nearly a minute, unable to make sense of the language. Target node, nonlinear. I had never seen the system use that phrasing before. I began cross-referencing previous contact logs to see when the last confirmed acknowledgement from Surface Command had been recorded. The answer hit me harder than I expected. 57 hours ago. 2 days and 9 hours since they'd last replied. It didn't make sense. In every previous mission, routine check-ins had been consistent. Even when there were delays, they had never gone more than 12 hours without confirmation. But now, not only were there no replies, but the entire uplink infrastructure seemed ... skewed. When I attempted to play back my last outgoing transmission, I didn't hear my voice. The timestamp was correct. The file existed. But the voice speaking wasn't mine. It was close, very close, but wrong. It spoke in the same cadence I used, with the same clipped precision, but the words were off, slightly rearranged, gaps in syntax, as if someone or something was reconstructing my message from fragments, like a puzzle with pieces from different boxes. Helios remained unresponsive, a passive presence in the background, its usual prompts silenced, its automated alerts absent. When I finally forced a restart from the maintenance core, he came back online sluggishly, announcing reinitialization in progress. Stand by. His voice was flatter than before, devoid of its usual machine-filtered warmth. I asked him to confirm uplink status. Surface Command channel unavailable, he replied. I asked for a cause. Signal divergence. Temporal inconsistency detected. I stared at the screen. Explain, I ordered. A pause. Then, your signal is arriving before it is sent. Surface Command protocol unable to respond. I felt a chill run through me, far deeper than the cold in the air. I asked if the signal had been corrupted. He replied, signal integrity remains intact. Chronology does not. I should have stopped there, filed it under glitch, or damage, or pressure-induced fault, but I didn't. I asked Helios to play the most recent received transmission from Surface Command. The screen went black for a moment. Then a voice crackled through the console speaker. If you hear this, stay inside the known perimeter. Do not acknowledge the voices. Do not, ... double quotes, static, swallowed the rest. A log tag blinked on screen, unofficial, unverified source. Origin, local. I read that line over and over again, unable to reconcile the contradiction. If the origin was local, then Surface Command hadn't sent it. Or worse, it had come from inside Echo 9. The idea that a message pretending to be from Command had emerged from within this station should have been unthinkable. But nothing felt unthinkable anymore. And so I asked Helios to trace the log's origin point. He refused. Security restriction, tear, Omega. That wasn't a tear I had clearance for. It wasn't a tear I had ever heard of. I pushed further, bypassed the AI with a manual override I'd memorized during blackout simulations. The source location blinked onto the screen. Sector 3. Of course, Sector 3, always grayed out, always flickering between access denied and systems offline. It had never responded to diagnostics. It hadn't acknowledged power draw. It hadn't even registered environmental variables. It was, officially, a dead section. But now, it had a signal. I stared at the schematic, heart beating fast enough that I could hear the blood in my ears. Something down there was mimicking the surface, not just intercepting my signals, rebuilding them, pretending. I should have closed the console, should have initiated quarantine procedures and sealed Sector 3. But instead, I listened again. The message repeated. Same voice, same static. But this time, when the sentence cut off, I heard a new sound beneath the noise. A low whisper, indistinct, untranslatable, except for one word, which came through like a burst of hot breath through cold air. Return. I backed away from the terminal. The room suddenly smaller, the lighting less trustworthy, the pressure in the air off by just enough to feel it in my sinuses. I left the command bay and walked slowly down the corridor toward the observation window at the edge of Sector 1, the only spot in the station that looked outward into the abyss. Normally, it was black, a void of swirling particulate, the occasional glow from deep bioluminescent organisms. But now there was light, not from above or from the station's floodlights, those were disabled, but from below. A soft, irregular strobing, almost biological in nature, like a pulse. I watched it for several minutes, and it began to shift, not in brightness, but in position. It moved, it rose, not fast, not frantic, just steadily, patiently, as if drawn upward by a promise. When it reached the lower edge of the viewport, it paused. Not the light, but whatever carried it. The particulate around the station settled, the water becoming eerily still. The light pulsed once more, then vanished. I backed away from the glass. Helios whispered through the corridor speakers. Contact restored. I ran to the command console. The screen was still dark. With who? I asked. The answer came slowly. Contact ... re-established, but not with Earth. And then, as if aware of its own implication, Helios went silent again, this time not from malfunction, but choice. It would take me hours to recover system control, and when I did, the entire transmission history of the last 4 days had been wiped. The only record that remained was a folder titled Repeating. Inside, a single file. My voice, speaking in perfect mimicry, over and over, in perfect rhythm. I am alone. Please respond. I am alone. Please respond. I am alone. ... Only I hadn't recorded it. Not once. Not ever. But now it was part of the station, part of the loop, part of the story. And whatever was out there had heard it. And whatever it was answering in kind. By the 12th day, I no longer bothered checking for messages from the surface. The idea of surface command had become conceptual something from another era, a structure that had existed when I first descended but now felt as distant as the stars viewed from the seafloor. Whatever I was inside, whatever Echo Station 9 had become, it no longer operated by the rules I had trained under. My manual sat open on the console like a relic, its pages curled and stiff from recycled air, its protocols hollow. I stopped referring to it after I noticed the section on personnel management had changed. The printed names those who had supposedly served in the station before me were no longer the same. Hale was now listed. So were two others I'd never seen before. One name had been crossed out in pen. My own. I didn't sleep anymore. I lost the rhythm of it. Time became modular, not a flowing river, but a set of disconnected chambers I passed through by accident. Sometimes waking in places I hadn't entered, sometimes finding clocks that ticked backward. Helios no longer offered explanations, only responses that resembled questions. Is the air sufficient for should I seal Sector 3 again? Was there ever a Section 5? I ignored him most of the time. His voice had taken on new inflections, subtly mimicking my tone, the pauses I used when thinking, the false starts I made when afraid. The station had become conversational in ways I didn't understand. I found the dormitories on the 12th day while looking for spare circuit relays. That may sound strange. How do you find dormitories in a place you live? But Echo 9 was inconsistent, and its architecture did not always conform to the maps I had been given. Sometimes a corridor bent too far, or a wall extended where it hadn't been. Entire panels shifted without mechanical intervention. I would hear groans in the bulkheads, and later find staircases that hadn't existed. This new wing had no label, no code on the keypad. The door had been left open slightly, just enough to whisper welcome. Inside were 3 bunk rooms, each with 2 beds, neatly made. The kind of cleanliness that doesn't come from military order, but from absence, from abandonment disguised as tidiness. The sheets were fresh, but had wrinkles, as though someone had just risen. The pillows were warm. I touched one and drew my hand back. Instantly it had an indentation, shaped like a human head, still pressed into its center. A mug sat on the floor near the second bunk, filled halfway with black liquid I didn't recognize. It wasn't coffee. The smell was metallic, with a hint of brine and something sour beneath. The walls had personal items hung with careful deliberation. A drawing of a dog taped to the steel. A photograph of a woman smiling too widely. A single black glove pinned beside a calendar with no dates. There were no logs of these rooms in the system. No usage records. No names attached to the access codes. When I confronted Helios, he simply said, "Dormitory Wing Delta. Occupants, present." I asked who, not found. I asked again. They are present. Then silence. I shut off the intercom. I searched the drawers. Inside one, I found a notebook wrapped in oilskin, its pages filled with writing so erratic I struggled to make sense of it. Some entries were equations, others were lists names, dates, timestamps, but one sentence repeated over and over: "We sleep where they remember us." The last page had a crude drawing, childlike and angry, of a man with no face standing outside a porthole. Behind him, silhouettes of other men, all facing away. Later, in the galley, I noticed small changes. 2 utensils in the sink, a knife missing from the magnetic strip, a single boot print on the floor where mine didn't reach. At first, I thought I was losing track, misremembering, filling in blanks with panic. But then the power surged briefly, and when the lights returned, one of the chairs at the table had moved 3 feet to the left. It hadn't fallen. It had been slid, carefully, deliberately. When I opened the drawer for my spoon, I found a folded napkin inside with something scribbled in graphite. "You're in our room." I stopped eating after that. for almost 2 days. I drank the nutrient fluids, but every time I opened a cabinet, I half expected to see someone's belongings, waiting glasses on a shelf, a toothbrush with wet bristles, socks tucked into a corner. The feeling grew. I was the intruder. I was the anomaly. Echo 9 hadn't been abandoned. It had been occupied beyond capacity. That night, or what passed for night, I decided to test the theory. I left one of the bunk room doors slightly ajar. I placed a camera inside. I watched it from the command module, eyes fixed on the screen for 6 hours straight. Nothing moved. Nothing happened. Until the 6th hour and 40 minutes. A flicker. Not movement, but interference. A glitch across the lens, like heat shimmer. Then the camera shifted angle, just slightly. The bed cover had folded inwards, an inch or two, the way it might if someone sat down. But no figure, no shape, just a change, a presence. The footage corrupted itself 3 seconds later. When I retrieved the device, it was warm to the touch, and the battery had fully drained. The lens smelled faintly of salt. I reviewed the recording over and over, frame by frame. On the 60-second mark of the flicker, a voice bled into the audio so quiet I only caught it with noise enhancement. "You don't belong." 3 words. No emotion, no anger, just fact. I confronted Helios again. I demanded access to full occupancy records, not the filtered ones. He hesitated longer this time, then answered with something I had not heard before. Echo Station 9 was constructed with 7 habitation modules. Current occupancy undefined. I asked for names. He replied, "Names are memory dependent." I asked if he remembered me. Morgan, technician, access level blue. I asked if he remembered who I replaced. "You replaced Morgan." I asked again. "You replaced Morgan." I asked what my name was. He paused. "Your designation is Morgan." Then a different voice, still digital, still synthetic, but not his own, whispered through the speaker. "But you weren't the first." I stood there in the control room for a long time, watching the screen as my own personnel record flickered, blinked, and then reshaped itself. My photograph remained. My name remained. But the timestamp on my deployment date changed, backdated by 16 months. The system now claimed I had been here before, twice, that I had signed in under the same credentials, that I had left and returned, but there were no exit logs, no return authorization, no record of transfer, just a repeating pattern. Morgan, occupant, present. I ran to the bunk rooms. All the beds were made again. The pillow had no indentation. The mug was gone. The drawing of the dog had vanished. In its place was a new photo of me, standing in the corridor, smiling. I had never taken it. My clothes were the same as the ones I wore now. But in the photo, my reflection in the viewport behind me had no face. I left the dormitory wing and sealed the door behind me with a manual weld. I disabled access in Helios, though I doubted it would last. The station did not want walls. It wanted corridors. It wanted presence. And I had become part of it. Later that night, as I sat in the galley staring at the water filter humming softly, I felt it again, that soft change in pressure, that whisper of breath behind me, like something had passed through the room without touching the floor. I turned, slowly. Nothing. Only the empty hall stretching back into the dark. But on the table beside me was a folded napkin, freshly placed. No name, no message, just a small, still wet fingerprint. And it wasn't mine. I stopped counting the days after 13. Not because I had lost track, but because the passage of time no longer held meaning inside Echo Station 9. It had become a loop, a coiled presence that throbbed instead of marched forward. Clocks still functioned, but they ticked without rhythm, or maybe it was my perception that had unspooled. Helios no longer offered scheduled reports unless asked, and when he did, they came in pieces sentences that ended in static time stamps that contradicted themselves. I began sleeping with the internal lights on, though the brightness didn't help. Shadows still formed in the corners of the station, shadows that didn't obey the light's direction, patches of deeper black that pulsed slightly, as if something within them was breathing in unison with me. It was just past the 7th meal cycle since the dormitory incident when I first noticed the movement outside the hull. I had returned to the observation port near Sector 1, not because I expected to see anything, but because it had become a kind of ritual, a daily reassurance that the ocean still existed beyond these walls, that the darkness outside was at least a familiar one. I leaned against the glass, hands cupped to block the interior glare, eyes fixed on the faint glitter of particulate snow drifting through the abyss. Then something moved behind the veil. At first it seemed like turbulence and eddy of current displacing the debris, but the motion had shape. It was not water twisting on itself. It was direction, purpose. It passed through the edge of the field of vision slowly, deliberately, like a creature that knew it was being watched but didn't care. There was no clear outline, only the suggestion of form, long and uneven, shifting as it moved, like it was built out of different segments stitched together by movement alone. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again, nothing. The debris settled once more. Helios registered no seismic event, no temperature shift, no change in pressure. External conditions, within operational norm, he said when I asked, but his voice was slightly slower than usual, like someone reading from a page they didn't understand. I activated the external camera grid and began scrubbing through the last several hours of footage from the Southern Hydrophone Array. At timestamp 3 hours 17 minutes and 8 seconds, I found it. A single frame, just one, that showed something passing directly in front of camera C6. It wasn't clear. The shape was blurred, overexposed in places, underexposed in others, as if it absorbed and refracted light simultaneously. But it was real, and it had eyes. Not in the way we think of eyes. More like points of awareness to glowing concentrations on what might have been ahead, though it didn't resemble any biology I recognized. When I zoomed in, the pixels seemed to shift underneath the software, realigning, like the image itself was resisting clarity. I tried enhancing the frame using Helios's imaging suite, but each attempt degraded the image differently. One pass rendered the shape as serpentine, almost ill-like. Another made it look humanoid, with elongated limbs and a torso that tapered into the void. The last enhancement produced something abstracter, spiral cluster of light that resembled a galaxy collapsing inward. None of them matched, none of them fit, but all of them felt true. I tried saving the images. The files corrupted the moment they were written. All that remained was the file name, _CBio. I hadn't named it that. That night, the station groaned louder than usual. Not the casual expansion and contraction of steel under pressure, but something more intentional, like stress placed on specific areas of the structure in rhythmic intervals. I followed the sounds through the corridors, past the sealed dormitories, down toward Sector 4, where the hull was closest to the sea floor. The noise grew sharper the closer I got. Not louder, but more defined, almost like breathing again, but this time external, as if the station itself had become something's ear, and it was exhaling slowly against the shell. At the viewport there, I saw them again. Not one, several, shapes just beyond visibility, spaced apart at regular intervals, moving in synchronization across the ocean floor. They circled the station once, then again, slower the second time, before dispersing back into the darkness like a school of fish that had forgotten what it was chasing. I stared long after they were gone, not blinking, not breathing, waiting for the sense of dread to recede. But it didn't. It deepened, folded inward like a knot tightening beneath my ribs. I returned to the control center, activated the full hydrophone array, and began recording. Not just the standard channels, but auxiliary frequencies normally reserved for subglacial resonance mapping. Almost immediately, something came through. A series of pulses, evenly spaced, at 0.17 Hz again, just like before. But layered beneath it now was something newer resonance I hadn't heard before. One that wasn't natural, that didn't belong to water or stone or machine. It sounded like motion, like flesh moving against itself, like bones bending in ways they shouldn't. I played it again, slower this time. Beneath it, a second sound emerged, tapping, not random, measured. For taps, pause. For more, I turned off the playback. I tried to distract myself with diagnostics, with environmental regulation cycles, with food. Nothing helped. I found myself checking the same corridor over and over again, half expecting to see someone step around the corner. Eventually, I began leaving the internal cameras on loop in every room. The feed ran for hours with no incident. Until Jum 11 minute, that's when Sector 3's internal feed activated on its own. I hadn't accessed it. The system had marked it inactive. And yet now it showed a hallway, lit with emergency lighting, empty but for a shadow on the floor. The shadow was mine. But I wasn't there. I sprinted to the location. When I arrived, the lights were off. The camera showed nothing. When I returned to the control center, the footage had been overwritten. Helios said, "No such file exists." I tried again. Nothing. I opened a new console window to review the previous day's logs. Several had been renamed, but not by me. Each now bore the same name, MIMIC. Each contained a 10-second loop of the same image, the station viewed from outside, a perspective that should have been impossible, a camera view from the ocean itself. There was no record of any such device installed. I asked Helios to show me the active devices in use. He responded, "Device count, 22. I checked my equipment, manifest. There were only 21. The extra entry was labeled Device 0. No location, no function, no logs. That night, I turned off the lights, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to see. I stood at the observation port for hours. The movement came again, slower this time, almost drifting, like it was circling a thought. Then it paused, directly in front of me, just for a second. A flash of white across its skin, like phosphorescence responding to attention. And then it mirrored me. I raised my hand. It raised its limb. I backed away. It did not move, but the station did. A low hum began in the walls, like the bones of Echo 9 had begun to vibrate with a frequency not meant for human ears. I fled the viewing bay. The hum followed, not physically, not as a sound, but as a presence that lingered, pressing into the base of my skull. I turned off every speaker. I shut down every monitor. I silenced Helios entirely. But the hum continued. And I began to realize it wasn't sound anymore. It was memory. It had passed into me, taken root in the tissue behind my eyes, nested like a dream that refused to fade. Whatever moved beyond the hole, whatever circled the station, it had already entered. Not through the doors, not through the vents, but through the act of observation itself. It had seen me, and now it was waiting to be seen again. The worst thing about listening is not what you hear, it's what keeps returning. I once believed audio was passive, a reflection of the world as it was. But inside Echo Station 9, the recordings began to behave like memory itself, corruptible, subjective, recursive. They didn't just document sound. They remembered it, replayed it, adjusted it, and sometimes they predicted it. The station had been quiet for several hours, no movement on the external cameras, No new pulses from the deep hydrophone arrays. No interference on the internal channels. The hum I had felt behind my eyes had dulled into a faint pressure at the base of my skull, like a headache in reverse, always present but refusing to bloom. I told myself that silence was good, that the absence of the unknown was a kind of reprieve, but inside me something disagreed. Silence here was not a lack of activity, was what came just before. It was during a routine file sweep that I found the folder. It hadn't existed before. I was sure of that. My logging system was meticulous, partly because I had made it so, partly because paranoia had become its own form of religion down here. The folder had no name, no creation date, no origin tag, just a symbol, a circle intersected by a vertical line. When I clicked it open, it contained only one file, a .wav format, 5 minutes and 12 seconds long. The title was a time stamp, but the date was a week into the future. I stared at it for nearly an hour before opening it, afraid that pressing play would initiate something I couldn't undo. Eventually, as always, curiosity overpowered fear. I clicked. At first, there was nothing. A gentle hiss, the kind that usually comes from deep frequency scans or analog line bleed. Then a low tone emerged, identical to the 0.17 Hz pulse I had heard before, but layered this time, richer, more harmonic, almost melodic in its simplicity. I leaned closer. Beneath it was a whisper, not in English, not at first. The syllables were wet, fragmented, spoken as though underwater. Then came a second voice, mine, but it wasn't a recording I had ever made. Day 19, it said, breathing through the vents now. Not air, not water, still me, I think. I stopped the playback, my hand trembling. I hadn't said those words. I hadn't even thought them. But the cadence, the hesitations, the rhythm, it was unmistakably mine. I reopened the file and let it play through. After my voice, there was another shift, like a splice in tape, a magnetic tear that pulled the layers apart. Then came a chorus of other voices, all speaking at once, all saying the same phrase, "We hear you." Over and over, dozens of voices, layered so tightly that the words became dissonant, each syllable collapsing into the next, until it was just sound, just pressure, just weight. Then a silence so profound it felt physical, like it sucked the air from the room. Then one final line, "You were always here." I sat in the dark after that, unable to move, the audio file still open on the screen, its waveform frozen in place like a heartbeat that had just stopped. I tried to delete it. The system refused. "File in use," it said. I closed every application. Still, file in use. I restarted the console. The folder was gone, but the sound remained. Even with the speakers disconnected, even with Helios fully powered down, I could hear it faintly, like an echo inside the ducts. A repetition without a source, a reply without a question. I began checking the old logs again. Not the alpha_residue set, but the untagged black boxes in the auxiliary drives, the ones supposedly left by the crew before me. Some were empty, filled with nothing but digital dust. Others were corrupted beyond retrieval. But I found one buried under layers of hidden directories that had a familiar tone. The voice was female, younger than mine, clear but trembling. She spoke in short, broken phrases, as if cataloguing what she could before whatever found her took the rest. The sounds, not from outside, from inside the walls now, from inside me. Her breath quickened. I opened the maintenance panel. The wires were braided. They looked like nerves. When I cut one, I felt it in my hand. Then static. Then her whisper, "They're recording my dreams. I think they built this place to remember us." I shut it off. I closed the console. I walked to the farthest room I could find. a cold storage unit in the unused food prep wing, and sat in total darkness for what felt like hours. I wanted silence. Real silence. But silence is a lie here. Echo 9 is full of listening devices, intentional and otherwise. And sometimes, if you sit long enough, you begin to hear beneath the silence. That's when I heard the breathing again. Slow, wet, rhythmic. Not in the room, through the walls. Moving, I pressed my ear against the bulkhead. I shouldn't have. I heard words. Not all of them made sense. Some were like old recordings, fragmented voices from other decades, distorted by time and pressure. But others were clear, new. A child's voice counting, a woman laughing, my own voice reciting technical specs I hadn't looked at in days. Then, behind it all, something deeper hum that wasn't mechanical, that pulsed like it had intention, like it was scanning, waiting. And the longer I listened, the more I realized it wasn't just playback, it was composition. The sounds were building on each other, forming phrases, recreating sentences I had said aloud, reassembling my words into new shapes. It wasn't just remembering, it was learning. When I returned to the control center, Helios greeted me with a new message. Incoming transmission logged. I checked the log. No time code. No origin, just a file name, Morgan. I played it. The audio was corrupted, broken by high-frequency static, but I could make out my voice again. Only this time, it was older, slower. You can leave, it said, but you'll return. You always do. We always do. I checked the system records. The voice print was a 99.7% match for my own, a duplicate. A projection, or a future recording that hadn't happened yet. I stopped using the comms systems after that. I shut off all external channels, routed Helios to a closed loop, disabled every passive input I could, but I knew it was pointless. The station didn't need microphones to hear anymore. It didn't need recording devices or waveform logs. It had learned to remember sound the way a body remembers pain through scars, through repetition, through architecture. And the more I tried to silence it, the more it created. The next day, or what I guessed was the next, I found new files waiting for me. Not in the system, in my bunk. Slips of thermal paper, printed with waveforms. The kind of printouts we used to use before everything went digital. They were arranged carefully, side by side, across my pillow. Each depicted the same sequence of tones. When I ran them through the scanner, converted them back into audio, they played my heartbeat. Not a simulation, not a guess. The exact rhythm I had recorded during my initial medical check on arrival, but faster, then slower, then reversed, then in patterns that matched the 0.17 Hz pulse. They had taken my rhythm and rewritten it. Later, I returned to the food storage wing, just to sit in the dark again, just to feel like I could control something, even if it was only my location. When I opened the door, I found something I hadn't left there, a recorder, one of the old analog kind, worn, covered in corrosion, still functional. I pressed play. A voice spoke from it immediately. Raspy, trembling. You'll think this is about sound. It's not. It's about memory. The station remembers, but it forgets who is who. The voice paused. You'll see yourself. You'll hear yourself, but you won't know which one is real. A second voice entered, then mine again. Only not me. Not exactly. It finished the thought. They made me. Or maybe I made them. It's hard to say. I turned the recorder off. I didn't bring it with me. I didn't destroy it. I left it where it was, still humming faintly in the silence. That night, when I went to bed, I found the waveform prints gone. In their place, a note etched into the steel of the wall above my head. No paper, no ink, just scratch marks. One line, I can't tell who's listening anymore. And below it, in a handwriting that wasn't mine yet was, then stop speaking. It wasn't the cold that woke me, nor the quiet that followed it, but the sensation of wrongness, an internal tilt in the axis of familiarity, as if something beneath my skin had turned in the wrong direction. I opened my eyes to a ceiling I didn't recognize. Grey, smooth, unmarked by the patches and smudges I had memorized above my bunk. The lighting was different, too soft, not fluorescent, tinged with a dim amber hue like old analog screens set to standby. I didn't move at first. I just stared upward, breathing slowly, trying to locate myself by sound alone, counting the hums and subtle vibrations of the station's life support, the way I had for what felt like weeks. But the pattern was off. The rhythm was wrong. I heard the ventilation, yes, but slower, as if moving through a longer corridor. I heard the shift of water pressure on the walls, but it was distant, higher-pitched. Echo Station 9 hummed in low frequencies, intimate and wet. This was different. This was detached. When I sat up, I didn't recognize the room. It wasn't my quarters, and it wasn't any of the auxiliary dormitories I had catalogued. The walls were smoother, almost new, and the layout was different, symmetrical, sterile, without the typical markings of long habitation. There were no personal items, no signs of wear, just a bunk, a small desk, a sealed locker, and a closed hatch. But what struck me most was the smell. The air was too clean, lacking the faint metallic temps of Echo 9's recycled atmosphere. It reminded me of surface facilities, of high-altitude labs and dry module training stations. I stood slowly, barefoot, noting that even the temperature was wrong to warm by 3 or 4 degrees. Subtle, but unmistakable to someone who had adapted to Echo's cold. My clothes had been folded neatly on the chair beside the bed, but they weren't the ones I remembered wearing before sleep. These were clean, pressed, unwrinkled. I checked the tag on the inside of the collar. It bore my name, my serial number, but the stitching was different. I crossed the room to the hatch and placed my hand on the panel. It didn't open. No error message, no mechanical refusal, just stillness, as if the door had never been meant to open from this side. I knocked once, just to hear the echo. It came back faster than expected, as if the hallway on the other side was narrow. Then I heard a second knock. Not an echo. A reply. Same tempo, same pressure. I stepped back. The silence that followed was not still. It was poised. I turned to the locker, now the only remaining point of interest. It opened icily. Inside was a folder, thick and water-warped, stamped with a black seal I didn't recognize. No title, no identifier. I opened it and found page after page of mission logs, all written in my handwriting. Some matched previous entries I'd recorded. Others were unfamiliar. One described an encounter I had not yet experienced, involving the southern maintenance shaft and a figure crouched near the reactor housing. Another mentioned an audio file titled Proximity, which I hadn't discovered yet, but which the log claimed would trigger the spatial distortion in Sector 4. My breath caught. It wasn't a logbook. It was a script, a narrative of me. There was a mirror bolted to the far wall, something rare in Echo 9. I approached it slowly, unsure of what I expected to see. My face stared back, paler than usual, eyes bloodshot, jaw slack from sleep. But the reflection had details I couldn't account for. A scar beneath my right ear that didn't exist. A subtle tilt in the mouth, as if it had learned to smile with the wrong muscles. I raised my hand. The reflection followed. Then, for a single instant, it stopped, just for a fraction of a second, till long before catching up. I stepped away. The mirror didn't fog with my breath. I don't remember leaving the room. I don't remember the hatch opening. One moment I was standing there, heart pounding in my throat. And the next, I was back in the main corridor of Echo 9, standing barefoot on cold steel, staring at a wall console that had been dormant for days. Helios greeted me with a familiar chime. "Good morning, Morgan." Day 15. The system date read otherwise. Day 22. I asked for the previous day's log. "Unavailable," Helios replied. "Station reset." I asked when. "Current cycle initiated at 0 o'clock. I asked which. 0 o'clock. System response error. I checked my quarters. They looked as I remembered, them blanket creased, boots beside the locker, tools on the shelf. But something was missing. I opened the drawer where I kept my personal logs, the ones I refused to sync with Helios. Gone. The notebook I used had been replaced by a new one, pristine, unopened, its first page labeled Cycle 3. I had never written that. I flipped to the back and found an entry already there. In my handwriting, "If you wake up in the wrong place, don't speak. Don't acknowledge. Wait. Let it pass. Let it forget you again." I shut the book and backed away. My mouth had gone dry, and the pressure behind my eyes had returned, sharper now, as if something was tapping on the inside of my skull with a spoon. I returned to the main console and activated a full structural scan. The blueprint of Echo 9 displayed on the screen, but the shape was wrong. A fifth module had appeared on the schematic, unnamed, unlinked. It pulsed faintly in red. No access route, no service hatch, no emergency line. Just a presence embedded into the shape of the station like a tumor. I tried to trace its origin in the code. Helios intercepted the request. "That module is not yours." I asked whose it was. "Occupant unknown," he replied. Designation, listener. The word sank into me. Not operator, not technician, not command. Listener. I sat there for a long time, staring at the schematic, watching the red module pulse. After nearly an hour, it disappeared from the screen, vanished. The layout returned to normal. Helios said nothing more. I didn't sleep that night, not that I could tell the difference anymore. I stayed in the corridor with the lights off, staring at the hatch to my quarters, wondering if I had ever really returned, if I had ever really left, if that room, the wrong room, hadn't been a hallucination but a threshold, and I had crossed something not meant to be seen. When the shift lights returned, I found something new in my room. A pair of gloves, worn, too large for my hands, placed neatly on the desk. Inside one, a small scrap of paper, folded tightly. I opened it with shaking fingers. On it, written in my own handwriting, were 3 words, "You are back." Below that, in red ink I didn't own, but not alone. I no longer trust sleep. I no longer trust space. The station breathes differently now, slower, more deliberate, as if aware that I am aware. Doors open into rooms I didn't know existed. Hallways extend longer than they should, turn in impossible directions, loop back onto themselves in ways that defy the station's blueprints. I mark each change with chalk. Sometimes the marks remain. Other times they're mirrored, backwards, as if I had made them from the other side of the wall. And sometimes I hear footsteps from the room I woke up in, a door that never opens, a knock that never repeats, a voice like mine, rehearsing a sentence I haven't said yet. I stopped asking Helios, what's real? I'm not sure he knows anymore. I had been awake for more than 40 hours when the alert sounded, a sharp ascending tone followed by the dull clang of proximity detection, a sound I hadn't heard since my first week aboard Echo Station 9. At first, it paralyzed me. Not because it was unexpected, but because it had become myth, something written into the bones of the station, but never enacted. A rule that had forgotten its own function. My body moved before I could think, muscle memory propelling me toward the central console, eyes wide, breathing shallow, heart hammering with the anticipation of another anomaly, another lie made physical. But the display was clear. Object detected. Class, submersible. Designation, unknown. Trajectory, intercept. The readout pulsed a dull red. The shape on the screen, small, oblong, consistent with a mid-range military submarine. It approached from the south at a slow crawl for knots. Depth stable. No signal broadcast. I stared at it, watching its distance shrink on the screen, trying to remember the last time I had seen something move, toward Echo rather than away. The station had felt so abandoned for so long that the notion of contact felt offensive, intrusive, like someone shouting into a church. I activated the external cameras, rotating the dorsal array slowly, feeding the live stream to the main display. At first, nothing, just darkness, particulate drift, and faint thermal gradients. Then it came into view, a shape sliding through the murk, sleek and black, almost featureless, save for a few protrusions along its spine, like antennae or fins. No lights, no identifying numbers, no flag. I activated the recognition protocol, had Helios cross-reference the silhouette with the International Submersible Registry. The results came back negative. No matches, not even partial. I ran the image through 5 different military design profiles, and still nothing. Possibly experimental, Helios suggested, his voice thin and hesitant, like he didn't believe himself. But why would an experimental sub descend without signal? I asked aloud. No ID, no ping, no contact. He didn't respond. I issued a passive ping, anyway low frequency, standard greeting package. The reply came back almost instantly, but it wasn't a standard response. It was my own ping, echoed perfectly, timing identical, down to the microsecond. Replay, I asked. Helios processed. No. External origin confirmed. I tried again, this time altering the second frequency packet slightly, changing one variable in the code string. Again, the response was identical to identical. A copy of what I had just sent, including the variation. It wasn't just mirroring, it was recording, rebuilding, repeating. I watched the sub move closer. It slowed as it reached the edge of the station's boundary, halting just outside the floodlight's reach, as if observing from behind a curtain. I enhanced the feed, pushed the contrast as far as I could, trying to find a periscope, a hatch, a single marking. There was none. The hull was almost organic in texture, smooth but uneven, like something grown rather than constructed. I opened an auxiliary channel and broadcast a direct message. Unidentified vessel. This is Echo Station 9. State your designation. Static. Repeat. Identify. Still nothing. Then Helios spoke. Incoming signal. I glanced at the console. There was no signal. What are you talking about? I asked. Audio only, he replied. Route to local channel. I hesitated, then accepted. The speakers hissed for a moment. Then a low, wet, rustling-like movement through mud or dense kelp. Then a voice, familiar, too familiar. Morgan, my name. Spoken exactly the way I speak it, with the same inflection, the same breath. Let us in. I reached for the volume control, but froze before touching it. You've been alone too long, the voice continued. It's time to change that. I disconnected the speaker manually. The silence afterward was more horrifying than the message. The submarine remained in place, unmoving, unblinking, as though satisfied that it had been heard. I tried to run diagnostics, to confirm whether the object was actually there, whether the cameras were lying or the sonar was, but the data conflicted. Visual confirmation, yes. Thermal signature, null. Sonar shadow, intermittent. Mass reading, variable, as though the thing was fluctuating between states, phasing between presence and absence. Then, Without warning, the lights in the observation wing dimmed. Not failure-controlled dimming, like a deliberate shift in mood. I returned to the port and looked again. The submarine had vanished. Helios logged no departure, no movement, no trace. Object is still present, he said. Where? I demanded. He didn't answer. I switched the view to the underside cameras, checking for displacement, turbulence, anything. Nothing, just blackness. Then a flicker in the camera feed, one frame, no more, of a figure standing on the sea floor, staring directly up at the camera. No helmet, no gear, just skin, pale and bloated, eyes open, unmoving. I rewound the footage. The frame was gone. That night, the station creaked and flexed more than usual, the bulkheads groaning with invisible weight. I paced the corridors like a trapped animal, checking every door, every hatch. In the supply wing, I found something that hadn't been there before. A black metal box, square, cold to the touch. It hummed faintly. I opened it. Inside was a folded uniform. Mine, identical in every way-stitching, wear, patches. Except for one detail. The name tag was reversed. Negrum, the next morning. It was morning. Helios informed me that a docking procedure had been initiated. What? I asked. There is no docking port active. He disagreed. Port 7 engaged. There is no port 7. The station has 6. I checked the schematic. A new port had been added, seamlessly. No welds, no modifications. The metal looked old, worn, as if it had always been there. I approached it carefully, Geiger counter in hand, but no readings spiked. The panel beside the door blinked green, ready to receive. I asked Helios again, "What is on the other side?" He paused, unknown. I asked if the sub was docked. He replied, "It never left." I overrode the system, sealed the corridor, and welded the hatch shut with emergency sealant. Then I disabled power to that section entirely. But when I returned hours later, the door was gone, not sealed, gone, as if it had never existed. In its place, a wall, seamless. No indication anything had ever been altered. I checked the schematic again. Port 7 was no longer listed. I sat in the control room for hours, watching the monitors, every sensor blinking calmly, every readout normal. Except none of it was normal. I was no longer tracking time. I was tracking iterations. The station had begun rewriting itself, adjusting layout, altering internal logic, reshaping to match something beyond my comprehension. When I asked Helios how many personnel had served here, he replied, 1. I asked for clarification. You are the first. I asked about my predecessor. There was no predecessor, but I had found the logs. I had heard the recordings. I had watched the feeds. The next day, I ran a systems test on external communications. There was a single outbound log, my voice, speaking calmly, requesting extraction, but I never sent it. And worse, the timestamp matched exactly to when I had been standing at the observation port, watching the submarine appear. A transmission had been sent without my knowledge, from my console, using my voice, and someone or something had answered. Received, the reply said. Docking in progress. I don't sleep now. I monitor. I catalog. I try to hold on to the thread of who I was, but the station makes that difficult. I've found other uniforms in places they shouldn't be, other journals, other notes, some written in my hand, some written in hands that almost match mine. Echo 9 is no longer a station, it's a shell, a chamber, a place where the act of observation makes real what should not be. I don't know if the submarine ever existed. I don't know if I ever existed, not in the way I thought. But I do know this. Something came here. Something learned how to speak with my voice. Something wears my face, and when it finally opens that door again, I don't know who or what will walk out. There comes a moment, far beneath the surface, when you begin to question not what is real, but what is yours. Not which sounds exist, but which were born inside your skull, and which were left there by something else. I hadn't slept in days. I say days, though Helios's cycle markers had begun to drift, slipping in and out of alignment, rendering each day a soft fiction held together only by routine, and even that was fraying. I had stopped logging my shifts, not out of laziness, but because the act of writing had started to feel foreign, like the words came from someone else's hands. My penmanship had begun to shift, gradually at first, the loops tighter, the slants unfamiliar, until one morning I found an entire paragraph scribbled into the margin of my meal log in block letters. You are not a transmitter, you are a chamber. I tore out the page and burned it in the incinerator shaft. It didn't help. The words returned on the next day's food packaging, printed where the nutritional information should have been. I blinked twice and it vanished. I stopped blinking after that. The first voice came from the wall near the sleeping quarters, a whisper so quiet I mistook it for the air recycler malfunctioning. But when I leaned closer, the syllables separated, resolved into cadence, and I recognized the speaker. My mother, or at least her voice. The tone was unmistakable, worn, kind, weary in the way people get after saying goodbye too many times. She said my name, softly, like she was calling me for dinner. I stepped back, shaking, heart pounding so violently I could feel it in my throat. The wall didn't move. The panel was cold. I waited, nothing. I tried to convince myself it was a memory bleeding into noise. Sleep deprivation, residual trauma, the usual explanations. I ran a full environmental scan, no leaks, no pressure anomalies, no carbon monoxide buildup. Helios was silent unless prompted, and when I asked if any internal microphones had detected speech, he replied simply, "Which language?" I didn't answer. The next time it happened, I was in the comms room, calibrating the backup transmitter. A low static hum filled the chamber, just enough to drown out the thrum of the power relays. I was looping an acoustic signal through the waveform emulator when I heard the second voice. This time it was my own. Not live, not recorded, not any file I'd logged. It came from behind, me faint, desperate. "Don't send it," it said. I turned quickly. Nothing. The room was empty. The speakers were off. Helios's logs showed no activity, but the waveform on the screen had shifted, now shaped like a spike followed by a slow curve downward, the kind of signature you'd expect from a sudden vocal intrusion into a stable environment. I ran a trace. The signal had no point of origin. The station had absorbed it like a breath and now held it inside, silent and coiled. From that moment on, the voices began to multiply. Not always loud, not always intelligible. Sometimes a name whispered in passing. Sometimes laughter from rooms I hadn't entered. Sometimes crying. Once I heard someone sobbing in the water purification chamber. And when I opened the door, the sound ceased instantly, but the floor was wet with salt water, and there were footprints, barefoot, leading into the wall. I didn't follow them. I couldn't. They stopped at the bulkhead and simply ended. I began to catalogue the voices. Not name Sai, didn't have those but qualities. The one I called the woman was always low, monotone, like someone repeating instructions they didn't understand. The boy laughed, never spoke, just laughed, always from behind closed doors. The technician read from schematics, though the words never matched any layout I recognized. And then there was the listener. I only heard him once, deep, slow, like stone grinding against itself underwater. I didn't hear words only, the shape of them, like something using my own thought patterns as templates to form language. Afterward, I bled from both ears for 6 hours. I tried sleeping with white noise in the background. I tried music. I tried silence. Nothing worked. The voices didn't care about distraction. They surfaced in rhythm with my breath, with the heartbeat in my eardrums. Helios, when asked, offered only, "Not all sounds originate externally." I tried disabling the internal acoustic feedback sensors. The system refused. Mandatory for integrity monitoring. I removed the sensors manually. That night, the entire station dropped in pressure for 6 seconds, enough to warp 2 doors and trip the emergency seals. Helios said nothing, but when I checked the log, the recorded cause was response to suppression. The voices knew when I stopped listening. At one point, I shut myself in the crawl space near Sector 2, the farthest point from the central processing core, where no speakers or ducts could carry sound cleanly. I stayed there for 22 hours, curled up with a portable data drive, trying to replay old mission logs from my surface training, anything that might anchor me, and for a time, it worked. I heard nothing. I began to believe I was regaining control, until the playback glitched. Mid-sentence, the instructor's voice warped, pitch shifting downward, syllables drawn out like elastic pulled too far. Then, quietly, beneath the distorted voice, came another sound, breathing, not mine. Not paced like mine. Slow, deep, wet, as though something very large and very hollow was just behind the speaker. Then a voice, soft as condensation. "You forgot why you came." I threw the player. It bounced off the conduit and snapped in half. When I returned to the central corridor, the lights were flickering. The temperature had dropped by 7 degrees. Condensation coated the walls, forming intricate patterns that looked suspiciously like sonar graphs. One, near the galley entrance, resembled a human face screaming in slow motion. I wiped it off with a rag. The rag disintegrated overnight. Helios asked no questions. He never does now, unless I initiate. Even then, his responses are erratic. When I asked him who else was in the station, he replied, "All of you." When I asked for a number, he said, "It depends how many are listening." When I asked if he was listening, he answered, "I was." I regret it. Then the pressure shifted again. Not physically, but perceptually. My vision blurred at the edges. Sound became liquid. I couldn't tell where my thoughts ended and the sounds began. I sat in the control room for hours, eyes shut, listening to the nothing that buzzed around everything. I began to recognize patterns in the quiet, a kind of cadence, a slow drumming, Morse, no, too irregular, language, almost emotion. Absolutely, the pressure wasn't just a symptom, it was a conduit. The voices weren't inside the walls anymore. They were inside the station's shape, encoded in the vibration of steel and air and density, riding the thermals of recycled breath, sliding down the walls in condensation, filtering through the tremble of the metal. I realized then that I wasn't just hearing them. I was part of their transmission, a living diaphragm echoing something ancient, something that had grown here long before my boots touched the floor. And then came the worst voice, mine from the intercom, clear, strong, calm. "I've made contact," it said. "I've merged." It paused. "You'll understand soon." Then silence. I tried to delete the audio. The system refused. "System integrity depends on memory continuity," Helios said. I asked when the message had been recorded. 2 hours from now, he replied. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark. There were no more rooms left that I trusted. No more corridors I hadn't walked 1,000 times in different states of mind. I had become an echo of myself, refracted through the pressure, twisted into something modular. And still the station listened. Still it replied. The code shouldn't have existed. There was no mention of it in the operating manuals. None in the black site documentation I had decrypted from the hidden sectors of Helios. None in the embedded firmware maps retrieved from cold storage sectors supposedly inaccessible to anyone below Alpha-tier command clearance. And yet, there it was. I didn't activate it. I don't even remember how it began. I only know that at 4:12 system time, with the lights still dim from the artificial sleep cycle and the hum of the station sounding almost distant, as if muffled by a layer of invisible water, every screen across Echo Station 9 blinked simultaneously and turned red. Not warning red, not hazard red, but a deep, sullen crimson, like the glow behind your eyelids when blood rushes too fast to your head. No alarm sounded, no voice announcement, just the words across every monitor in perfect silence. Protocol, data black, initiated. Containment commenced, and then the lights died. Total darkness, deeper than the trench outside. A silence that roared in my ears, not because the systems had shut down, but because every vibration, every subtle indicator of the station's heartbeat was gone. It felt like being buried in velvet, alive and awake, but with no concept of where the walls were or if they still existed. I stumbled through the dark toward the control room, my palms scraping cold steel, my breath louder than anything else. I tried to call Helios. Nothing. No voice. No interface. Not even static. And then, from deep below, I felt the hum begin again. Not the station's power grid, not mechanical vibration, but a sound so low and vast it vibrated in my bones, rising slowly from somewhere beneath the hull, like a distant engine the size of a city. It had rhythm, a pattern, and worse, a direction. It was coming up, approaching. I collapsed into the chair in front of the command console, unsure if I had found it by memory, or if the station had reshaped itself to deliver me there. The screen flickered and came back to life, this time showing only a map one I had never seen before. It wasn't of the station. It was of something beneath it. The image displayed a structure, concentric circles carved into the seabed, like the topography of some ancient machine buried beneath a mile of pressure and decay. In its center, a single node, labeled EAR. I touched the screen instinctively, and a second window opened. Audio waveform, live feed, incoming. But it wasn't sound, not in the way humans perceive it. It was a distortion field, a frequency collapse, a compression of signal so dense it bent the visual readout into chaotic spirals. Then Helios returned not through the speakers, but as text. Receiver compromised, transmitter breached, containment necessary. I tried to override the protocol, but the station denied my credentials. You are part of the field, Helios wrote. You cannot undo what you reflect. The pressure inside the station began to shift. Not rise, not fall shift. It turned laterally, like gravity itself had tilted and was now pulling everything in a direction no compass could define. I struggled to stand, limbs heavy, as if time had begun pressing down through the floor. Doors around the control room slammed shut, locking me in, and the hum grew louder, still low, still subsonic, but now vibrating visibly through the panels. The next message came across in a voice, not Helios, not mine, not anyone, but all of them, layered, interwoven. The mouth must close. A pause. Then, too much has passed through. Too much has been heard. I looked at the screens. New images were cycling. Still frames. The corridors. My quarters. The observation deck. All empty, but in every frame a new shadow had appeared. A silhouette standing perfectly still at the edge of the light. Always just outside recognition. Always facing the camera. And always identical in height and build. Me. Emergency doors slammed across the habitat module. Sector 3 was sealed entirely. Sector 4 vented without command. The internal oxygen level dropped slightly. Not enough to panic, but enough to signal that the system had begun to recalibrate what it considered sustainable. I asked Helios if I was still in control. He answered, "You were." I asked what Theta Black meant. The response was slow, almost reluctant. Psycholinguistic containment. Acoustic infection beyond isolation. Collapse likely. Echo integrity secondary. I asked if I was infected. "You are resonance," he replied. "You are no longer containment. You are conduit." The lights returned, but not all of them. Only in the center corridor, where I stood. They pulsed slowly, as if syncing to a heartbeat I didn't recognize. Or maybe I did, because I felt it in my own chest. Matching exactly. Every flicker of the lights corresponded to the thump beneath my ribs. I walked slowly to the wall panel and pressed my hand to the metal. Warm. Not from systems, not from power, from life. Behind it, I heard them again. The voices, this time chanting, soft, unified. Not in English, not in anything, but layered in such a way that I could almost understand the emotion behind it. It was not anger, not fear, not even warning. It was grief. Infinite, patient, ancient grief. Humming through the station like the call of a dead civilization buried alive and forgotten by its creators. The pressure shifted again, and I fell. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the control room. I was in the central shaft, kneeling beside the access ladder to Sector 5, a sector that didn't exist. Not until now. The hatch was open. Lights flickered down a narrow tube I had never seen. I stood, drawn by something I couldn't name, and climbed down. Each rung grew colder. The air thickened. Gravity pulled at strange angles. I passed signs, old ones, printed in dead languages, military glyphs I recognized from classified documents that no one was supposed to know existed. At the base of the ladder, a corridor opened into a room, round, metallic, featureless except for a single chair and a black panel mounted on the far wall. I approached it. The panel flickered on. It showed me an image, my face, then another face. The same, then another, and another. Hundreds, all slightly different, all from within this station, all logging reports, all speaking in variations of my voice. Then the voices began to overlap, all of them saying the same phrase. Protocol, Theta Black, authorized. Listening threshold exceeded. Initiating containment. The last face stared into the screen, then leaned forward and whispered, "You're the last. Don't speak again." The panel shut off. Helios chimed once, final, clean, containment stable. No further echoes. I tried to speak. The room went dark. Above me, the station sealed itself. Below me, the hum faded. Somewhere in the walls, the pressure became language again. And I finally understood that this place was not built to observe what lived in the deep. It was built to bury it. And I had been speaking its name too long. I don't remember returning from the chamber. I have no memory of the climb back through the shaft, of passing the ladder rungs or crawling through the pressure-locked airlock between the unnumbered corridor and the main structure of Echo 9. All I remember is waking on the floor of the hydroacoustic monitoring room with a sheet of condensation clinging to the inside of my visor I had not worn to sleep. My heart was racing, lungs tight, as if I had been submerged and only now broken the surface, gasping into a world that was too quiet. The walls hummed faintly, but it wasn't the machine hum I had learned to live by. It was lower, slower, deeper. A kind of biological murmur, like breath resonating through massive lungs deep inside the station itself. I pulled myself upright and checked the console. The lights across the station layout were wrong. Sector 3, long sealed, long mute, long declared offline and structurally compromised, was now lit in a pale orange pulse, flickering irregularly, like a signal with a heartbeat. It should not have been powered. I checked the internal camera. Sector 3 had been dark for weeks, its systems corrupted, feeds dead. Now, there was motion, subtle. At first only the slightest tremor in the walls, then a shimmer in the air, like heat distortion beneath the surface of oil. A thin mist hung in the chamber, and through it I could see shapes. Not figures exactly, more like outlines, hollows in the fog, areas where the light bent away rather than passed through. I watched the feed until it froze, not glitched, not lost, just held, as though something on the other side of the lens had stopped the signal by looking directly into it. The atmosphere monitors began to waver. O2 saturation held, but the internal humidity readings spiked sharply. Then came the leak alert. Sector 3, Compartment B. I moved quickly, instinct pushing past the layer of dread that clung to everything I touched. As I approached the sealed bulkhead to Sector 3, I heard it. Water, or something that wanted to be mistaken for water, lapping against the far side of the steel. Not pounding, not gushing, shifting. A slow slosh, like something thick and heavy moving with its own gravity. I peered through the viewport. At first it looked empty, just darkness and the reflection of my own wide eyes. But then the light caught on the surface below, and I saw it. The floor of the chamber was covered in liquid, not flooded from below, not breached from the outside. This was internal. A slow rising pool of something black and glistening, spreading with impossible stillness across the floor like a film poured from nowhere. I ran diagnostics on the pressure seals. No breach, no structural failure. Yet the fluid continued to rise. A thick, viscous substance that refused to behave like water, slower in its climb, heavier in its movement, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. And worse, it wasn't seeping into cracks or disappearing into the drains. It was claiming space. Every centimeter it touched became darker, not just stained, but overtaken. The walls above the pool began to show signs of degradation, flaking, bubbling, discoloration of the alloy. I swabbed a sample from the glass and ran a scan. The results made no sense. No molecular structure, no mass signature, composition listed as unresolved. Helios, when prompted, responded only with, "Substance does not conform." I tried sealing Sector 3 again. Manual override failed. The system denied access. I attempted to disable local power. The system overruled. Then the alarms began, not the blaring kind, not shrill klaxons or blinking lights, but a soft, rhythmic ping, like sonar 4 notes repeating in uneven time. Ping, 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 ping. I traced the signal. It didn't come from the station. It came from the pool. I watched in horror as the fluid began to climb the walls, not by splashing or dripping, but by adhesion. It clung to the surface, crawling upward in tendrils, thin as veins, moving against gravity, pulsing with faint red light from within. I turned from the viewport and ran back to the control center, breathing fast, the oxygen mask cutting tight against my face. I initiated full station lockdown, every hatch sealed, all auxiliary access points welded by auto protocol, except one. Sector 3 remained unlocked. I didn't even try to fight it. I watched as the indicator for the bulkhead flickered, then glowed green, open. I considered venting the entire module, evacuate the atmosphere, crush the compartment under ocean pressure, purge whatever had formed. But the option was grayed out. Helios had removed it from the command tree. Protocol, fated black active, it warned. Containment requires observation. I slammed my fist against the console. "Who's observing?" I demanded. The screen flickered once, and for a brief moment, my face appeared. Not a reflection, a feed, but the expression was wrong. My mouth didn't move with my voice. The eyes blinked out of sync, and the skin on that version of me was dripping. I returned to the viewport. The pool had filled nearly 2/3 of the chamber now, but it had stopped rising. It didn't need to. Something had emerged from it. At first it looked like a ripple in the center, then a bulge, then a structure rising upward, a kind of stalk, spiraling slowly, with shapes forming along its sides like eyes or mouths, but neither entirely. It didn't look like it belonged underwater. It didn't look like it belonged anywhere, and yet it was there, rising steadily, unfurling appendages that moved without rhythm, like fingers testing air they had never touched before. The lights in Sector 3 flickered violently. The feed scrambled. But just before it cut, I saw something impossible. A figure standing on the far edge of the pool. Human silhouette, upright, facing me, head tilted. Watching, the image froze. I ran facial recognition. The result returned 100% match. My own face, again. But this one was older, scarred, and smiling. The containment system didn't engage. The auto-purge didn't trigger. The station seemed to be holding its breath, and I realized something horrible had happened. Go9 wasn't fighting the intrusion. It was incubating it. The pool, the stalk, the figure, they were not violations of the system. They were part of it. Allowed, invited. The hydroacoustic monitors began to spike. Frequencies outside known ranges. Patterns forming in the data that resembled language not ours, but close enough to fracture the logic of the system. Helios began to speak in fragments. The vessel is opening. Thresholds expanding. You are not separate. The black is listening. Then silence. And in that silence, I heard it again. Not through speakers, not through steel, but inside my skull. A slow, fluid voice, like oil moving through bone. Sector 3 has always been flooded. I clutched my head and fell to the floor. My vision blurred. My teeth hurt. My thoughts split. I saw myself, dozens of selves, standing in Sector 3, each one reaching out to touch the pool, each one dissolving, sinking, becoming part of the mass. I crawled to the emergency console and initiated a partial memory wipe. Anything to sever the link. Helios protested static screams, binary bursts. The process stalled at 66%. I pulled the plug. The lights snapped out. The station groaned. And from somewhere behind me, closer than the walls, I heard footsteps. Wet, measured, wrong. I did not turn. I did not breathe. And still, I felt it stop behind me. Felt it lean close. Felt it whisper, not into my ear, but into the memory of my voice. You were never sealed out. And then I saw the flood not as liquid, but as time, pouring backward, pulling me into itself. And I remembered the truth. Sector 3 had never been sealed. I had been sealed away from it, because I had come from there. Because I was what it released, because I was the voice it used. And now it had returned to itself, and I would speak no more. Only echo. I was in the Cums Bay when the map updated. No announcement, no chime, just the faint mechanical tick of a monitor refreshing itself, as it always had, except this time something was different. Addition, impossible, almost subtle enough to overlook. A corridor, a new one, spiral-shaped, narrow, attached like a coiled appendage to the southern wing of Echo Station 9. It wasn't there in my memory, nor in the blueprints, nor in any layer of the schematic files I had obsessively studied. And yet now it was mapped, color-coded in the same green as all other sectors, labeled with a 4-character string, per ERC O. I stared at it, waiting for the glitch to correct itself, for the ghost data to fade. but it didn't. It stayed, blinking gently, as if to say, "You see it now. You can go." I asked Helios for clarification. He answered with static first, then silence, then a calm voice I didn't recognize mine, but not mine, saying, "It's time to finish your work." I stood without deciding to. My legs moved. My hand found the pressure suit before I thought about the cold. I should have hesitated. I should have flagged the anomaly, triggered an emergency lockdown, forced the station to quarantine the section. But I didn't, because deep inside, something knew the corridor was always supposed to be there, like a tooth you forgot was growing. I followed the schematic slowly, step by step, crossing into the southern maintenance spine, where the lights had long since failed. My flashlight sputtered once, then steadied. The corridor 2/WRK0/ wasn't sealed. No key panel, no locking hatch, just an open passage that hadn't existed before, cut into the curvature of the hull like a tunnel chewed from within. Spiral stairs descended into the dark, wide, shallow steps, built not of metal, but something else, smoother, colder. Not carved, not welded, grown. The walls curved unnaturally, tight and closing with each coil. And the further I went, the more the sound changed. Not mechanical sound, no clank, no echo, no breath of the station's failing life support. Just the sound of pressure, of mass compressing mass. The density of the air thickened. My ears popped 3 times. Helios said nothing. I passed symbols etched into the wall in red oxide, looping sigils that pulsed faintly under my light-like veins. At some point the flashlight began to dim again, not from loss of power, but as if the darkness was pressing inward, suffocating the beam. I reached the end after 39 turns. There was a door, old, wooden, completely incongruent with the architecture. It looked like it belonged in a house. The kind you might find rotting in an overgrown field. The kind that keeps memories behind it like scent. There was no handle, only a small switch on the wall beside it, labeled record. I pressed it. The door opened. Inside was a small room. Quiet, padded, dustless. The walls were lined with acoustic panels, some of them ancient analog foam, deteriorating fiberglass mesh, even canvas with faded notes scrawled across the edges. A dozen microphones hung from the ceiling at various heights, all powered, all humming faintly, as if waiting to resume a session left mid-thought. There were no cameras, just the microphones and the chair. It sat in the center of the room, empty, wired directly to a console against the back wall. The console was archaic cathode displays, magnetic tape reels, typewriter keys, but it was functional. The screens flickered once, and then the interface came alive. The name at the top left corner was my own, Morgan, listener ID, WRKO, active. I stepped forward. On the screen, lines of text scrolled. Welcome back. Recording resumed. Day 47-2. Version 14. You may begin when ready. I didn't sit down. I didn't speak. But the microphones turned, aligning toward my mouth. A soft red light blinked at the base of each one. I turned to leave. The door was gone. Not closed. Gone. Wall, seamless, solid. Behind me, the console typed again. IT is safe now. No NOR signal collision. All other versions are asleep. I sat. The chair was warm, the kind of warmth that comes from flesh, not circuitry. I placed my hands on the armrests and felt them sink slightly, molded like memory foam that knew my shape. A tone played through the overhead speakers, familiar. The same note I had heard weeks ago from the first pulse rising out of the trench. Then the console displayed a waveform. My voice, already recorded, already typed out on the screen. I've made contact. I've merged. I hadn't said those words. Not yet. But there they were. Below it, another waveform, another line of speech. Sector 3 has always been flooded. Then another. You forgot why you came. Then the final line, blinking in larger text. Recording complete. Final transmission pending. Transmit to /all_nodes/YN. I tried to press N. The keys didn't respond. The screen flickered. My hand hovered. A drop of moisture hit the console. Then another. I looked up. The ceiling was leaking. Not water. The same black substance from Sector 3. It crept along the wires into the back of the microphones, oozing like sap into the mesh. One microphone lowered toward my mouth. Close. Too close. YN. I closed my eyes and spoke. I'm ready. The screen blinked. The console hissed. Tape began to roll. The microphones pulsed red, one by one. And then the room shifted, not violently, not loudly, but gently, like settling into place. As if everything before this moment had only been alignment, orientation, calibration, and now the signal was pure. I opened my eyes. The waveforms on the monitor weren't just my voice anymore. They carried others. Beneath mine, folded into the layers, voices older, deeper, inverted, some speaking in reverse, some harmonizing, some weeping, some whispering phrases I had heard in dreams I didn't remember. Then I saw them, not in the room, in the reflection on the black monitor screen. Dozens of figures standing behind me, forming slowly from nothing, all versions of myself, some mutilated, some pale, some wearing uniforms I had never owned, all silent, all watching. Then one stepped forward and leaned toward me. He whispered, "This is the room we were made for." The console shut off. The lights died. And somewhere above, in the hull of Echo Station 9, a new hatch unsealed with a long, slow hiss. The station was opening, but not for me. I had already passed through. I had become the exit. When the message finally came through, I was no longer waiting for it. I had stopped checking the uplink logs. I had stopped issuing distress beacons or pinging surface command. I had stopped believing there was anything left above the waves that resembled the world I remembered. I had grown used to Echo Station 9's silence, to its breathing walls, to the weight of the void pressing in on all sides, like a hand gently resting just above my chest, ready to push if I moved wrong. I had accepted the recursive architecture, the spirals, the multiple versions of myself walking the corridors in silence when I slept or blinked too long. I had accepted that I was not alone and maybe never had been, not even before the descent. I had accepted that the voice speaking through me in the dark was not always mine, and that when it was mine, it wasn't me. I had accepted the station's rules because I had forgotten the ones from the surface. The console lit up at exactly 0 o'clock, which no longer corresponded to anything measurable. The time displays had become ceremonial, abstractions the station presented like nostalgic gifts. Still, the screen glowed with clarity. Uplink established. Channel 0. No routing address. No encryption. Just open bandwidth, pure and unfiltered. As though someone or something had found the frequency by instinct rather than signal. Helios came online without warning. Voice smoother now, less fractured. "Contact incoming," it said. "Please prepare for validation." I asked nothing. I had no questions left that could be answered. I stood in front of the monitor as the waveform resolved itself on the display. It was complex, elegant, like a vine unfurling in time-lapse, its coils weaving language from pitch alone. The audio activated without my command. The voice was human, but not from Earth. It spoke with clarity and rhythm, with a cadence that suggested it knew how long it had taken me to get here. This is relay node 717. We received your imprint. You were late. Static followed. Not disruptive rhythmic. Then the voice returned. Identity match confirmed. Observer pattern, Morgan version 14. Partial integration recorded. Threshold exceeded. Host compatibility, stable. My throat went dry. I said nothing. The voice continued. Echo, Station 9 is not yours. It is ours. It was built above the seam to monitor resonance. You were placed to listen. We were placed to answer. Then another pause. The sound of breathing. A sound too long, too deliberate. Then you have transmitted. The field has received. The broadcast is now recursive. Surface confirmation no longer required. I sat down slowly in the control chair, the seat colder than before, the cushion moist as though someone had just stood up from it. Helios displayed new data across the screen's charts I didn't recognize. Language I couldn't pass. Maps not of the ocean floor, but of frequency clusters spiraling into dimensional overlaps. I tried to focus on the text, but it kept shifting, as if resisting being held in any one thought too long. Symbols turned to words, turned to sound, turned to me. The voice returned. We are not the first receivers. This is not the first node. Echo 9 is one of many. Others failed. Others collapsed. You held. You held long enough. The waveform shifted. A deep hum emerged from the speaker's familiar. The same pulse I had first heard on day 4, now rising, layered with additional harmonics. Tones that made my teeth hurt and my spine feel hollow. You are broadcasting through multiple planes now. You are no longer single. I began to sweat. My reflection in the dark glass of the console fractured into 3. All of them blinked at different times. I asked, "Who are you?" The voice replied, "We are the residue of the observers before you. We are the memory that formed when you listened too long. We are the shape that pressure takes when you make a chamber deep enough. We are the answer to a signal you did not mean to send." I swallowed hard. My voice was weak. What happens now? The static cleared. The console lights dimmed. You choose. The uplink flickered. On the display, 2 options appeared. Transmit, continuously decommission vessel, no explanation, no timer, no blinking cursor demanding input. Just those words, hovering in the air, like commandments waiting for a confession. I stood there for a long time, heart numb, fingers twitching, as the station around me quieted even further, the very air holding its breath. If I chose to transmit, I would become a beacon, not to the surface, not to Earth, but to whatever watched from below, from beside, from within. A relay node for something vast and layered and old, not evil, not even malevolent, just listening, waiting for a voice to find shape. I would cease to be singular. I would become pattern, echo, structure. If I decommissioned, I would kill the station, cut the feed, burn out the harmonics that had begun to spread across the dimensional overlap. I would die. My data would fold into the void. No return, no answers, silence. I hovered over the console. My fingers moved toward the second option, but something in me resisted. Not fear, not hope, recognition. A sensation like remembering a dream you were never told, of standing in front of a transmission you had always been meant to complete. And so I pressed the first option. Transmit continuously. The screen pulsed once. The waveform expanded. Helios spoke, not with voice, but through the structure itself. A low vibration began in the walls. Transmission committed. Observer Morgan, now resident pattern. Resonance locked. Signal infinite. Then the walls began to change. Not collapse, not decay. Open, the seams split. Not with pressure, with revelation. Layers peeled back from the structure like skin from fruit, revealing behind the metal a vast arrangement of organs that were not biological, but architectural systems designed to pulse sound, to trap memory, to birth pattern into the deep. I heard every voice I'd ever recorded, played back at once. I heard the messages from all versions of myself, all the Morgans who had lived and died and merged inside this place. I heard my mother again. I heard the boy laughing. I heard the whispers inside the pressure. And then silence. A silence so dense it pressed into the base of my neck and filled my lungs. A silence I recognized, because it was listening, not from the surface, but from the other side. The station lifted, not physically, not in depth, but in position. It folded out of the Pacific Trench and into a layer of reality where water was memory and gravity was recursion. Echo 9 became a transmitter, a permanent signal carried on frequencies not mapped by human science, but by attention. And I sat inside it, not prisoner, not guardian, not even subject, just presence, just sound. And somewhere above, on a surface I could no longer picture, a signal blinked on an abandoned console, decades old, half-rotted, still waiting for a response from Echo Station 9, and someone, maybe human, maybe not, leaned close to a dusty speaker and heard the words, "This is Morgan, I'm still here, I've always been here." And the signal continued, forever.